The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
We're in the middle of the start of a new year. Media is making a reset right now. And for a media podcast like mine, the Broadcasters Podcast, yeah, it does make it a little bit more difficult to try to do a show like this and to make sure that I have things to talk about here and enough material to really just go into. But, you know, there's always certain things that come up that will bring a little bit of interest, that will bring a mainstream focus into the program. And cancel culture came into the headlines again this week with Steve Harvey, who was promoting his new Judges show, Judge Steve Harvey. The guy is just so damn busy. I don't even know how he has time for all the things that he does. But here he is. He has come back out and he made some comments. We're going to talk about that. And it got all through the industry rags this week. We'll talk about that. Also on the program, a few other things that can't really catch my eye. A couple of numbers we're getting looking back at last year and how things happen. Music radio be considered a kingdom of gold. And where media companies are focusing on streaming, how the audiences of cable networks are continuing to drop. So we'll look at that coming up as well. I mean, with some cable shows, they do luck out. I mean, you do have sports programming that does really well. Some scripted programming, mainly Dexter and Yellowstone, that did really well in the areas of 8 to 9 million viewers for their finales. We're also going to talk about streaming platforms and service providers are looking to go in, as we talked about, consolidation, wooing subscribers when it comes to retaining customers. 2 or 3 or 4 heads are better than one. So what are they doing to try to bundle up? And if it's not going to be the streaming services themselves, it's going to be the media providers, the content providers. Say your phone companies, your other companies are out there. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And also get some information that came up about how radio and how it performs against Spotify. And then we have media experts sounding alarm on the rise of paywall content, those big fat paywalls that I don't like, but we have them anyway. And then podcasting having a bit of a shaky start to 2022 as Spotify shuts down one of its podcast studios. And a story from Bloomberg talking about how we haven't had all the hit podcasts that are out there are more than 7 years old. And why aren't there any new podcast hits? We're going to talk about that. That's a pretty easy answer. And of course, King of Podcasts, I'll be able to answer that for you. We'll make sure to get all this in as we record this hour of the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for being with me, listening to the show as you always do. Really glad to have you here. Make sure to go look at the website. If you need to go and look at any of the links to any of the content that I talk about here on the show, I basically give you a rundown of what I'm talking about. You can find the links to all the articles I refer to at broadcasterspodcast.com or wherever you find the show. They're available there. You can go ahead and copy and paste, look at everything as I'm talking about it as we're going on. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate all of you out there that are listening from other countries. It's amazing the audience that has listened to the show, have those from India or Mexico or Japan or China, and just looking at a worldwide audience that catches the show, even though it's very microcentric. I mean, I'm not picking up a huge audience on this. Sometimes I do. I did really well when it came to talking about Howard Stern, Joe Rogan a few months back, when I talked about reggaeton and the rise of dembo. And, oh yeah, it goes back to last year when I started talking about BTS and the possible chart manipulation of Billboard thanks to the sales records. And that obviously changed things on the Billboard charts. So when you're looking at everything right now in media, music, and Disney's Encanto right now is flowering up the charts on the Billboard Hot 100, or the Hot 100, and on the albums chart. The Weeknd just coming out with a new album called Dawn FM. I've had a chance to listen through all that, but there's a few songs that are definitely keying off of there that sound really good. And when it comes to movies, we're still kind of off to an early start. I did watch the 355 this past weekend. It did not do well in the box office, but I enjoyed the movie, and the movie didn't do too bad nevertheless. It wasn't one of those normal January movies that you think would just kind of stink, but it didn't happen this time. Television, we're waiting for shows to come back. Well, we had a couple of finales. We did have the finale of Dexter this past weekend, which was really good. I thought they actually did a good job of taking the original story that they had finished up, bringing it back for one more showing, just so they can get to the ending here and say, okay, we're going to give it a proper finish. And we're going to, without spoiling anything, we're going to handle the story of Dexter that people will be much more satisfied with. And I, watching the entire series, I think they did a pretty good job of putting a proper ending to the show. So I'll give them credit with that. It was good. Showtime did a really good job. Obviously, people came and watched it. And, it was amazing to go and see a show like that come back after all this time. And it did really well. And they did a really good season. Was really good. I enjoyed it. Was definitely better than one of the other seasons. It was not the first season great, but it was really good. Nevertheless, it was one of the better seasons we had, and it was a good way to finish the show, given the chance they had a lot of time to go ahead and rethink the idea and bring it back. So they did. And especially when you have the cast that is able to come back for that show and pick up right where they left off. I mean, really, basically, when you look at Dexter, he looks no different than he did when we last saw him, right? And the story with Harrison, great. It was really well done. Really enjoyed all that. All right, so we're going to go right into Steve Harvey. A number of articles have come out. I'm going to just pick a couple of them to just bring up on the program tonight. We're going to start with Hollywood Reporter first. He slammed cancel culture and said political correctness has killed comedy. And in the subtext, they say here that this actor-comedian claims he can't release another comedy special without ending his career. Quote, every joke now, it hurts somebody's feelings. So in the story, he's promoting his ABC courtroom comedy series, Judge Steve Harvey. And remember, this guy just finished wrapping up his own television talk show, a daily talk show. He has this radio show, the morning show he does for various stations around the country on adult urban contemporary stations and some urban contemporary stations. So he's around nationwide on radio, syndicated, nationally syndicated. And, of course, Family Feud, which he's done, I think it's 13 seasons now, or 14. Like, he's the longest running host of Family Feud. And the show has still done very well. And you can see it on TV anytime you want. Game Show Network, it's all over the place. And also in your local TV stations, you can find it. Now, here's what he said at a recent press tour panel of the Television Critics Association. He said, quote, we're in the cancel culture now. Nobody can say anything he wants to. Chris Rock can't. Kevin Hart can't. Cedric the Entertainer can't. Dale Hughley can't. I can go down the list. The only person that can say what they want to say on stage is Dave Chappelle because he's not sponsor driven. He's subscription. Quote, if I had continued to try to continue as a stand-up, there's no way I could maintain it because political correctness has killed comedy. Has killed it. Every joke now, it hurts somebody's feelings. What people don't understand about comedians is that a joke has to be about something. It has to be about somebody. We can't write jokes about puppies all the time. The joke can't be about bushes all the time. Some of these jokes have to be about people because that's the most interesting topic. So if I come back, I have to wait until I'm done with my TV career. And I'm not done. I don't have to call it, this is it, or something like that. He also went on to say, quote, one of the reasons I stopped doing stand-up was my wife informed me that God was about to do something. I had no idea what he's going to do. He was going to give me this new show, and it turned out to be the best thing that happened to me. He also talked about the legal system, saying, quote, just because it's the law, don't make it right. Every law is not a correct law. We have a law in this country that everybody has the right to bear arms, but everybody shouldn't bear arms. Everybody shouldn't have a gun. That's clear to me. Every stand your ground, every shouldn't be told to stand their ground. That's why I'm glad my show is not that type of court. So he's kind of doing a Judge Judy type of deal. He says he's going to do the show for 2 years. It's going to be a huge success. And then he also went on to say that I wanted to be successful, so I had to be tested. Because on the way to becoming successful, you've got to understand disappointment. You've got to understand attacks. You've got to understand litigation. You got to understand being misunderstood. You've got to be able to be able to deal with being talked about. Nobody talks about you if you're not doing nothing. You've got to develop tough skin. I just say to people when you're going through challenges to deal with it, envelop it, pray about it, and ask for the lesson behind it. Steve Harvey stands as a role model in media today. There's not many guys that have the pedigree that Steve Harvey has. Well-dressed, pretty well-spoken, very multi-talented. Now, does he do an excellent over-the-top job of doing Miss Universe? Maybe not, but he's pretty good at it. I enjoy seeing him on the show, along with the women. Family Feud, you can feel like, okay, he's doing the show in Atlanta. He obviously acts a certain way around, different families, things like that. That's fine. But overall, he's funny, and he knows how to run that game. He is not going to be Richard Dawson, and he will not be Ray Combs, but he is the right host for this generation of Family Feud, for a show that started, come on now, 46 years ago. I mean, almost to the point I was born, that show. And I think it was April 1976. That's a long time for a show to come up and back and up and back. And then remember, when they relaunched it again, I think it was in the 98, 99 season, I think it was. Then you had a cavalcade of different hosts. From Louis Anderson, Richard Karn, John Hurley. Was there somebody else in between? I can't remember. No, I think those are the three. And then we got to Steve Harvey. And he's held on to it ever since. And he's done a good job. He had a talk show and did that really well. The guy's busy. Dare I say he's probably busier than Ryan Seacrest is. Or he is basically the equivalent of Ryan Seacrest. And not just that, you could kind of feel like he's a bit humbled. Obviously, he has his own clothing line of suits. He's got his hand on a whole lot of things. The guy is an entrepreneur. Whoever thought a king of comedy was going to go so far in his career, but he did. And he made great connections. That's a guy that has done it, looks like he's done it his way. And he's been able to kind of stick to his own guns on how he does things. And with some of those names he brought up here, when he talked about some of the comedians, he picked some pretty big names right there that have been able to make their way through. Chris Rock has made it through very successfully. Kevin Hart, obviously. He's a movie star over and over. Sergio Hill, now he's still doing a weekly series, sitcom, and he's been holding on. He's constantly had TV work. Constantly. And Dale Hughley has been there, had his own sitcom, stand-up work, a lot of other things going on. I believe he's also been on radio as well. Funny how some of those guys always make radio, too. But yeah, it's fascinating with all that he did. And in this story, there's more that came about as a result of what happened here. There was another from Deadline. I brought that in there just to go and add some more, but obviously it's the same story. Another story that came in was from USA Today that also talked about this because there was some talk about comedian and a star of movies and television, Patton Oswalt, also getting caught up into the mix because of his thoughts on things, about his associations. Now, look, regardless of what you think, here's what we got the story on this. The story came in from David Oliver in USA Today this week, and he talked about a world where everyone enjoys the same flavor of ice cream, where everyone can't stop giggling at the same joke, when everyone votes for the same politician. That world will never exist and probably shouldn't. But a world where everyone respects each other's differences might be possible. Emphasis on the might. And that's what Patton Oswalt tried to say. He faced backlash after he shared a photo on Instagram with his friend Dave Chappelle, which we, of course, if you remember being on the program a few months back, we talked about his Netflix special, The Closer, the last one of his series of stand-up specials on Netflix. And there was an outpouring of criticism regarding its transphobia. He has not been canceled. He has obviously been continued to move along and move forward. Now, Oswalt, after he put up the Instagram post, felt he needed to go and respond to criticism about his friendship, which has been for 34 years with Dave Chappelle. And he wanted to set the record straight on his own beliefs. Quote, "For all the things he's helped me evolve on, I'll always agree with where he stands now on transgender issues. But I also don't believe a seeker like him is done evolving, learning. You know someone that long, see the struggles and changes, it's impossible to cut them off. Impossible not to be hopeful and open and cheer them on. Also, I've been carrying a lot of guilt about friends I've cut off, who had views with which I couldn't agree, or change in ways I couldn't live. Sometimes I wonder, did I and others cutting them off make them dig their heels in deeper, fuel their ignorance with a nitro boost of resentment and spite? So he's creating an example, according to this writer here, of what it means to agree to disagree with your friends on an individual level. But people must determine their tolerance for views that don't align with their own. And could this be the antidote to cancel culture? Now, I've talked about, there's a book I've been reading now, The Coddling of the American Mind. And halfway through the book now, when they talk about younger people and the level of pressure, the level of stress, anxiety, depression that they're going through, what social media has done to them. This was one thing that was actually came up to mind when I was reading about this as well, and it was in the book. When you're allowing teenagers on social media, able to get on the social media at 13 years old, like Facebook, and other places where Facebook was the first to allow teenagers on their platform, thus opening cyberbullying, thus opening various issues, and creating this environment where you still have children, in essence, as teenagers, that, it's hard for them to go ahead and, just think that, well, they don't have to be responsible or accountable in person to what they say or what they do online. I mean, they could be held accountable. They could be held responsible, but there's some cases where, the supervision that could be provided by parents or older siblings or, peers, it's not there, because, you have to be attached to them on a site, and you have to really know and follow what they're doing, what they're saying. Like, you have to follow what they're doing on their messaging. You have to follow what they're doing on their phones. The other problem is, number one, social media was available for teenagers. Number two, they now have a phone. They have their privacy. And it's amazing what things come out of a phone, whether it's text messaging, whether it's Snapchat, whether it's videos, whether it's stories, whatever, that will trigger, that will embarrass, that will shame, that will anger, and that will bring someone to tears when they're looking at something online through social media. So while I could appreciate those influencers that are out there that, they're trying to go and use the platform to monetize, which I think is the way to go. But for those that really, they are on here because everyone else is on, and to feel peer pressure, which is different than what you have in person, in real life, IRL, and to not have that here. And the society that's being created, what their focus is in the book of Coddling the American Mind is on college campuses and the kind of truths they're given and the kind of direction they're given, the microaggressions they receive, and how they must be protected even more. And how the truth is as well, they talk about how, younger adults are more like children than they were before, because some younger adults, they haven't grown out of being a kid. I mean, in my way, I kind of feel like that too. My age, I feel like I'm the same way. I mean, I feel like I'm still acting like I'm 22, 23, 24 years old. I really do. The only difference is my body's getting a little bit older, but I can tell. But my mind and the way I think and the way I talk doesn't make much of a difference. But it is true. I mean, the one thing I know that, kids around me, my age, and others, is that if you wanted to go ahead and, interact and be sociable, you had to talk. You had to be talking back to somebody else or have somebody talk to you. You actually had to go out and meet people. And I mean, the good thing was you had levels of people. I mean, if you had it right, if you did get out of the house and you went out and played, I might have gotten bullied and might have gotten picked on, and I was a nerd in high school, but I had a different environment of kids I was around that didn't look at me that way. I didn't didn't feel like a nerd. I didn't feel like a geek. Didn't feel like a dweeb. Didn't feel like something was wrong with me. That kept me grounded. And because of the fact I had that actually kept me okay. I mean, the only thing I really had that kind of messed me up was, relationships and dating, which if you hear one of my podcasting series, you hear me talk about it all the time. But when it comes to social media and how I felt about, and how I can understand where some kids now, we used to, pick on political correctness and participation trophies and entitlement. We used to joke about that 10 years ago. Now, that's what happened. What actually came to be, those kids that were entitled and they were kind of given a little more room to be angry or be upset. And they were getting disciplined, and they were not kind of being held to within a boundary to know what's right or wrong, to know how to be responsible or accountable for themselves, and to have a bit of thick skin, and to realize you just can't be offended by everybody. You're going to get offended. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get a little bit of traumatization. Yeah, that's going to happen. Can't say that doesn't. And if you're of a different race, gender, culture, whatever, yeah, you might get picked on. You might get something told about you, and it might hurt. But you have to be able to recover from that. Now, it's acceptable for everyone just to go ahead and say, well, no, we're going to sit behind you, and we're going to make sure that the person that did that to you is going to be really punished. And not just punished, we're going to destroy them. Like even the language that's being used where people are violent and people are aggressive. I mean, the level of where we are now as a society, if you heard somebody, you already heard about what's going on with Dave Chappelle and the transphobic comments that was made on the closer. When you have groups getting together, and among those groups, I'm not trying to say anything, but we know that in the political side, when somebody says something that they disagree with, we know that on various sides of the aisle, there are some people that are extreme that take this so far. They say, well, I'm going to kill that person. I'm going to create a death threat. Or I'm going to maim, destroy, obliterate, and use these almost like war terms, like combative terms for something that somebody said. I mean, yeah, I could be cliche. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that's out the window now. No one really cares about that at this point. And the thought of agreeing to disagree, I thought we could think like that about 5-7 years ago. Not anymore. Doesn't happen. Now, moving along in the story here, there's a therapist they talked to in this USA Today article named Mo Ari. He says, quote, when people sit stuck in their antiquated ways, quote, we must not cancel them quickly. We must call them higher and challenge them to evolve with the culture. And then in the story they have here, they also make mention of how it's time to cancel culture, call it accountability culture. Okay. But the point is, it doesn't make a difference. I mean, it's because one side feels like the other side needs to be held accountable. Well, the truth is, you're not going to change some adult people's mind. It's like teaching an old dog new tricks. These are cliches for a reason. And there are things like this that happen for a reason. And for you to feel like, okay, you can try to persuade and you can try to convince somebody they're wrong. If they're not going to listen to you, you do not destroy them. You do not cancel them. I've made this point before too. And I know many other people have made this point. But it's something that is still critical now in media today and on all of our entertainment. Where we're being denied entertainment because people can't, we can't go outside the box. We can't cross that blue, that blue line. You used to always talk about the blue humor. We can't even go there, which is where there's a lot of great comedy that comes from there. Some of our most heralded comedians came from there. When they crossed the line of language, when they crossed the line of, worry about tolerance, equal opportunity offenders. And for some people, it might be just a little bit different. Now, they go on to talk to some other people that made comments about Patton Oswalt's response to his friendship, with Dave Chappelle. They go on to say friendship isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of relationship. One person's ability to tolerate a behavior or attitude won't necessarily match up with someone else's. A psychologist, friendship expert says, quote, for some people, the fact that someone might disrespect an identity that they feel important or a cause that they feel important is enough of a con that they can't consider them as a friend. But for other people, that's not the case. So they go on and move on and talk about this, and we're going to just leave it there. In the case of Oswald and Chappelle, they say here, and any celebrity for that matter. There's only so much the public can understand about who these people are. One director of the Frederick Douglass Institute for African American and African American Studies at the University of Rochester, I butchered that, says, quote, Oswald's reflection reminds us that one of the biggest myths is that we, the public, know celebrities through their loudest moments. But now the other thing, too, is when you have friends, and what they're trying to say about Patton Oswalt is that, and what Patton Oswalt's trying to say as well, he wants to stay friends with his friend, Dave Chappelle, and hopefully will help him see the light of his mistakes, the error in his ways. That's fine, as long as it doesn't become violent, as long as it doesn't become anything deadly or, that's real physical, emotional harm. I mean, I don't know why not. But people always take it too far because somebody has to get hurt. I mean, because some of the mindset of those that are practicing cancel culture on the side of the tiki torches and trying to cancel somebody, that's immaturity. A mature mindset is going to rationalize. That's going to try to make the attempt to make a point heard, if that's what you choose to do. And if not, then you leave it alone. Why do you think you can go ahead and push your narrative in front of everybody? I mean, I look at some shows that get put out there that are of a different, that might have to do with gender or race. And I look at some of the shows that have come on Netflix or Hulu or other places, and I see some shows, and I'll make the point, it's a Latinx, cultural type of thing, an all black cast, all transgender cast, whatever it is. And I'm seeing entertainment that is there for an audience, but they're getting canceled because the shows are not performing well. Because there's also something where all these big corporate companies, they need shows that, sure, they can go and put across the right mindset of trying to be sympathetic and be tolerant and be understanding and to be an ally to various causes in order to go ahead and play nice with everybody and make sure that what they do checks all the boxes. But we also know that also goes so far. It doesn't need to go this far. It can't be organic. It has to be forced. So you have to force a narrative. You have to force a lifestyle. You have to force things that are pushed out there. But, when I think about it, it doesn't matter anymore. What you're doing now, and with cancel culture right now, I think what really people are doing right now, they're becoming much more apathetic. We're getting much more cynical. We just don't care anymore. We're tired of fighting. We're tired of people just, having a reason just to get mad. We just don't care anymore. I don't care anymore. I'm not afraid to say that. I just don't care. It doesn't matter. But for some people, they can't help themselves. Anyway, that's what they're going to do. So this story will continue. Some people, especially with celebrities that are kind of immature in their own ways, or they're kind of pushed into a certain direction because of peer pressure. Celebrities and those that want to be in the game of cancel culture, there's an immaturity right there. And you're basically acting like teenagers getting bullied and pressured into doing something that maybe you don't want to go ahead and be the one that has to go and put somebody down or try to destroy somebody. But you have to follow along because they're your friends. It's almost like, like a fraternity or sorority. How dare you go against? Because if you go against our thought process of destroying somebody or canceling somebody out, then you're out. I mean, it's not fair, but you have to judge. You have to really just put a judgment call and say, you know what? Is this worth it? Do I want to be a part of this? And I think more people don't want to be a part of it at all. That's all it is. There's a couple other stories I want to get into now in the second half of the program. I want to take from RadioInc.com. They put a story out. It caught my attention, an opinion piece called Music Radio, A Kingdom of Gold. This is Larry Rawson who writes this story. And he's president of Edison Research. And he writes some information about the music that's out there on radio, free radio, terrestrial radio, AM, FM. Maybe you still listen on your radio and you listen to the radio station. Sometimes I don't because, number one, I can't stand the commercials. And number two, you got to have a really good stereo in your car to pick up an AM, FM station that sounds really good. And it's loud. And it really picks up. Like, you got to have something that really gets an amplification. If you're lucky to get an HD radio in there, it'll sound great. Just as good as Spotify. But for the quality itself, that's why I like listening to Spotify or TuneIn or Radio Garden or anything else. I mean, for me, audio, I have to hear it with quality. It has to sound good. I mean, hell, even this show, this microphone I spent money on, a year and a half ago because I wanted something good. And I always cared about how good I sounded on the mic. So I spent a good amount of money on this microphone, the Shure SM7 USB, to make sure I got the best. I make sure this microphone is right in front of me. The microphone is like right on top. I'm not pulling this away from myself. I got the baffling in here, and I'm set up. The only thing I would have a little bit different that would make it even better is if I turn the fan that's off, or else I'd just sweat to death in here, and I can't do that. So I do have a fan in here, and if there's anything you hear here at all, it's the fan. Otherwise, if I had it off and it was a cold night, then you would never hear it, and it would sound perfect. But I have to give a little sacrifice. So I can live with myself with doing that. Now, one thing you talk about the fact is, what's interesting now is the stations that are out there and what kind of music they play. And for me, it's a matter of if there's still an audience out there for a younger audience of what music they can listen to. And there is, but it's different altogether. So 10 years ago, roughly 2011, Nielsen was able to do their rating system with the ones that took over Arbitron. They created the personal people meters, the PPM markets. And with that, it changed the whole dynamic of genres and what music formats were made for radio stations around the country. So now they have a full 10-year interval for comparison to see what they've done. The changes with the biggest gainers on top, the biggest losers on bottom, of what stations have done since. So there have been changes on contemporary hit radio. Now, 2011, we would have not have had Spotify or Pandora. We would have Apple. We would have had iTunes by this point. We would have had Napster. We would have had Rhapsody and some other music download streaming sites. But it wasn't still that easy. We didn't have a full service where you just streamed everything there. I mean, you could stream a lot of music, but you still had to buy it. You still had to go and download it some ways, and you have to put it on an iPod or some kind of a drive so you can go listen to it anytime you want. Like it was, it was getting a little bit easier, but CDs could still sell, and you could still get music sold, and record stores could still go on and be somewhat successful. FYE was still a pretty popular store at that time. But then, by knowing a little more direction of what your sample audience was listening to, you can see the big difference. So in the last 10 years, there's been a 30% increase in the amount of classic rock stations, a 49% increase in contemporary Christian stations. So your Way FMs, your K-Loves. News Talk rose 8%. Spanish Contemporary, 17% up. Your classic hits format up 7%. Classical up 22%. And then when you look at the negatives down towards the line, you're saying to yourself, okay, all news formats down 22%. Regional Mexican stations down 14%. And here's the biggest ones. Rhythmic Contemporary Hit Radio down 53%. Pop Contemporary Hit Radio down 33%. So the hit music has changed a lot. And part of what happened here also was that rhythmic style radio, the music had changed itself for the younger crowd. It's not always up-tempo. And what is up-tempo doesn't get played on the terrestrial radio stations as much. They don't do that. In Europe, you can find a lot of that music. Like I actually, over the holidays, I did put together several playlists. I decided to curate my own playlist because I'm kind of tired of listening to trying to listen to some of the playlists that are out there from Spotify, or to listen to some of the online radio stations to hear a consistent playlist of music. So with the extra time I had, I decided that was my project for the end of the year. I was going to create some playlists so that I can also just make it pretty easy for me to go and maintain them. So I have 2 on Spotify. If you look for King of Podcasts on Spotify, you can find me there. And I have 2 playlists there. One is called Miami Power. That's my current playlist, about 6 hours long. And I think it's about 110 songs that's in there right now. And in there, you can catch what I think is the music that I would have been listening to if I were running a radio station now in Miami, and what music would be the music I think would be listened to best in the clubs, in people's cars, and what the younger audience will be listening to anyway, based on what they're listening to on streaming and other things like that. So in this particular list, 111 songs, 6 hours, and I constantly change it. So the reggaeton, the Dominican dembo, which I think would be something that is starting to catch on here, it would catch on, or maybe it is, I'm not sure because I don't go to the clubs enough, but I think it's something that would be catching on now. EDM, so all the dance music I hear from Europe or the UK, and the music I think would still be here if a station like Power 96, WPOW here in Miami, which was really good at a number of formats. They did a thing where when you listen to their station, it was a rhythmic contemporary hit radio station. It's not like that anymore. It's now a much more contemporary hit radio station. And we have 3 in the market like that. One that plays more towards the gold standard CHR music. So for the last 10 years, 20 years or so. And then 2 stations head to head that are playing the current music with not much difference. Now, in this format, I talk about reggaeton, dance, some pop, some music that might be considered R&B or hip-hop, because R&B and hip-hop are pretty much like together, unless there's some certain artists and certain songs that are absolutely R&B straight. But R&B, we know, dropped so much in the last 20 years. When it used to be such a strong, dominant format, now it's just much different. It's much underground, much like rock. Except for a handful of artists that are able to go ahead and they kind of transition over one way or the other. So now, country radio is an all-time low in 2021. Alternative, urban contemporary is also lower. Again, the only contemporary stations that have gone up are Christian and Spanish. And because Spanish, there's a thing where some people just feel like some more Spanish stations, reggaeton is becoming much more prominent, and then you have stations that are just a lot larger ethnic markets in various big cities where those stations just got brought up. So what they're saying here is that even though radio listening is declining among 18 to 34-year-olds at a much faster clip than those age 35 and older, the data just doesn't help the argument that what we are seeing is merely the aging of profile of radio listening at play. Because even among 18 to 34-year-olds listening to contemporary formats is way down. Contemporary CHR is down more than 50%. Pop CHR down 29%. Country, it's at its lowest among 18 to 34-year-olds, along with alternative and urban contemporary is down 30% from what it was 4 years ago. So a logical conclusion from these trends is declines for music radio formats that depend on new hit music in its various forms are coming from a different form of loss within radio listening. They're listening through streaming now. New music is Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or iTunes and Amazon Music. That's where it is. Radio, they say today, still has a strong bond with the music community. One still hears artists talk about the thrill of hearing their song on the radio. Labels partner on radio concerts, and airplay clearly boosts an artist. But the trend is clear. When one scans through the individual market ratings, one sees classic rock, classic hits, mainstream AC, and news and sports stations taking the top slots. American music radio is rapidly becoming a kingdom of gold, where one mostly hears the hits of yesteryear, the songs that were made hits back when radio made hits. Yeah, it's becoming a repository. It's becoming a time capsule. And I've said it for a long time that radio didn't have to be like this, but now look at where we are. What are you going to do? It's sad. Now, one person in this story, a commenter, actually talked about the fact that the quality of music, that uncensored music is one of the reasons streaming is utilized by the younger demos. Could it be a lot of reasons? It's understood the classic formats are doing well as older listeners still utilize AM/FM radio. And the people who had turned in the past to radio to hear the latest and greatest are reducing their listening faster than the public at large. Wonder what those broadcasters can and will do about it. Great story. A nice little nugget from Radio Inc. right there. And I can appreciate a consultant like Larry Rawson coming in to tell us the story and explain this, because this is huge. I've talked about this for years. That music radio has lost its way. They're not willing to be... I really feel like they've just abandoned the idea that they can go ahead and... maybe they'll still be able to retain some audience, but they are still obviously investing in contemporary hit radio, into hit music. So if that's the case, then work harder at it. Look at music in other markets. Why does it just have to be American music? Why does it just have to be a certain kind of deal? Like, let's change it up. Because honestly, if I was a radio programmer now, I would totally do things different. That's why I put that playlist together. Miami Power, if you want to look for it on Spotify. And I also have one called The Soundtrack of South Florida. That's a format that goes back to, I'll say, the mid-'80s. So back when Miami Vice first started, late 80s, all the way up until current day. So that's all the hip-hop, all the reggae, all the dance music, all the Miami bass music, all the hip-hop, all of that. The music we would have partied to. Basically, Generation X to today. It's all there. So, a bulk of 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and current up to current day. It's all right there. And I still also update that one as well with new music. That is finally considered gold. But it's quite a fascinating story. Wow. Now, while we're at it, I'm going to go and take a story from James Cridlin, who runs Radio.Today or the Radio Today podcast, mostly European-based. But he put out some interesting information that he put together. He's a radio futurologist. And he wrote here where he put some information about radio versus Spotify. He mentions how Morgan Stanley released some data around Spotify use compared to AM/FM radio in the U.S. It shows how strong AM/FM radio still is, but also how much Spotify and other similar services are eating out of younger audiences. If media senior management are 50 plus, they can be very much out of touch with how people are consuming their product. So here's what they get from Morgan Stanley, who is, by the way, they invest in Spotify, just so you know. Reported listening share for leading digital platforms increased while broadcast radio fell. SiriusXM, Spotify, and YouTube have seen increases in listening share year over year. Increases largely come out of AM/FM radio, which saw reported listening share fall below 300 base points to a leading share of 36%. Listening behavior varies widely by age, with Spotify garnering the largest reported listening share among 18 to 29-year-olds at 21%, more than twice of Apple Music's reported share. And Spotify is also building a more engaged, satisfied customer base. So on their platform listening share, or the percentage of listings on Spotify by Spotify users, it's increased to 30% in this year's survey, second only to SiriusXM. And the increased number of hours has increased to 4.2 hours per week. I think I listen about 15 hours a week, maybe 20. I listen a lot. Not to mention, I also have a playing in when I'm sleeping. I actually have it. It's kind of like in the background, playing as well. It's something I just like to have. Spotify's also moved into an effective tie with SiriusXM for number one in overall listener satisfaction. In-car listening share across all respondents remains low, but it's up 300 base points to 10% of the share. And their paid penetration of iOS and Android smartphone users has moved up and is in line with Apple Music and YouTube Premium. Now, we also talked about this a while back about how your local radio DJs might not even be real. There was another thing we heard about that as well. They talk about how the fact that there's sometimes now we're getting voice tracking for somebody from a different market, Now they're trying to say that they're also getting robots or AI able to go in and put together talk segments in between records. That's what's happening as well. And that's a shame if that's really the truth. Kind of scary if you think about it. And now we're going to go ahead and focus on streaming here on the program with a couple of stories I wanted to go and bring up on that pop right up. First of all, a story that was pretty damaging when it comes to music, when it comes to cable television versus streaming. Forbes, a media consultant named Brad Adgate, writes, as media companies focus on streaming, the audience of the cable networks continue to drop. So there's a point that in 2011 as well, almost 10 years ago, we're learning all this 10 years later, the real change of the digital disruption and how much it has changed. And we're getting some numbers that really depict what's going on. In 2011, over 90% of TV households had a paid TV subscription, with a number of cable networks having over 100 million household subscribers. At that time, many top-tier cable networks were televising original programs, attracting millions of viewers each night. In 2011, there were 19 cable networks that averaged over 1 million primetime viewers. And it provided reliable revenue increases from two sources: subscriber fees and advertising. Now, Wall Street is now looking for revenue growth from streaming video. So, streaming now, with the exception of Yellowstone on the Paramount Network and a few others, most original programs are now streamed. According to Ampere Analytics, their programming investment for over-the-top services reached nearly $50 billion in 2021, with continued growth anticipated. Among streaming providers that have ramped up their programming budget, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock, and Paramount Plus, which these parent companies of these streaming providers also own a number of cable networks. Besides investing in content, media companies are more likely to promote their streaming services and their programs rather than cable. And many top-tier networks now have reported double-digit declines in primetime audience delivery since 2011. And the number of cable networks that used to average 1 million viewers has dropped now to 9, 3 of those being news channels. Now, they go into a lot of things when it comes to Disney and the other services. So Disney, a couple of things that are really bad about ESPN. In the past year, they lost 8 million household subscribers. ESPN Plus, their streaming service, which launched in 2018, increased subscriber count by 66% in 2021, has 17 million subscribers as of date, up to date right now. Now, ESPN Plus costs subscribers $6.99 per month or $69.99 yearly. And Disney also charges about $10 a month for ESPN and ESPN2, the cable providers. ESPN has the highest subscription fees of any cable or broadcast network in the industry. Now, primetime average audience of ESPN did grow by 11% in 2021, and in 2020, it totaled 1.62 million viewers on average. One of the few cable networks that got an increase. But in the last 10 years, ESPN's viewers has gone down 31%. Then we go into Comcast. Now, here's another one. FX, which had a lot of great shows, by the way. When you look at the lineup of shows they had back not too long ago, Justified, Sons of Anarchy, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, American Horror Story. We could include The Shield. We could include Damages. I mean, there's a lot of shows on FX I love. 2021, the primetime audience declined by 67% to 504,000 viewers. And 10 years ago was 1.53 million primetime viewers. USA was also at that point. At one point, there were 3.17 million viewers primetime in 2011. They had, of course, WWE programming, which they still have today. Suits, Royal Pins, Psych, Burn Notice, Covert Affairs, a lot of original scripted dramas. And now their audience is just under 1,848,000 viewers on average. Decline of 73%. Now, USA is looking to go ahead and bring more live sports because of the shelving of NBC Sports Network. They're adding more live sports, including the Olympics, English Premier League, NASCAR, and the newly relaunched USFL. So we'll be back to the way their channel was when they launched as a cable sports network and compared to ESPN over 40 years ago. Warner Media, TNT is one of the 4 cable networks to average over 2 million viewers in prime time. In 2011, they had Resilient Owls, The Closer, and Leverage. 10 years later, their audience is now 1.09 billion viewers, a decrease of 53%. They do have AEW Wednesday Night Dynamite, or they did have it last year anyway, which helped their audience. The sister network averaged 1.61 million primetime viewers in 2011, and now it's down 36% to 1.03 million in 2021. Viacom, CBS, MTV, when they had Jersey Shore and Teen Mom, were very popular. 1.19 million viewers. Right now, it's under 400,000 viewers. Same thing with Comedy Central. Used to have over 1 million viewers. Now it's down to just above 300,000. Big. We can go on and on. Same thing with news. We talked about the drops in those a few weeks ago. Now, they make the point about despite sharp declines of viewing, cable networks continue to garner more viewers than either streaming or broadcast TV. But despite cord cutting and more competition, there remain far more cable channels available in homes than streaming providers or broadcast networks. It is kind of tough to let that remote control go. But then one of the things that has to happen too is that when you have so much content available at your fingertips, that's what you have to worry about, getting subscribers together on multiple subscriptions, which is the story I'm going to take here from Morning Brew that talks about that. Streaming platforms and service providers are teaming up to boost subscribers. So SiriusXM, they ramped up their premium plan, now including a complimentary 12-month subscription to Discovery Plus. And this arrangement joins an ever-lengthening list of companies pairing up to boost adoption rates on both services. You have service providers like Verizon, where they give them lengthy free trial subscriptions and giveaways to help get the attention of consumers overwhelmed with entertainment options and separate subscription fees. I think Netflix does it with T-Mobile. I know Verizon had Apple Music, and they also had Disney Plus for a 6-month trial, which we know they're trying to do that. But hey, look, free trials changed the game in 2019 when certain Verizon customers got a year of Disney Plus for free, and Disney Plus did balloon in popularity. 1/5 of the early subscribers came through Verizon's freemium free trial plan. And Disney Plus reported a healthy 118 million subscribers as of Q4 2021. So AMC and Discovery Plus, that are new companies now with streaming, they're trying to do the same thing. So there's a lot in it for streamers. A 12-month giveaway locks in customers long-term, giving streamers time to convince them their service is essential. And for streaming services with app-supported tiers, scaling up fast is also crucial to the advertising side, as marketers will only spend on streaming services if they believe there's an audience there to target, and viewers on a free trial are still targetable. And like I said, I think more of that's going to happen down the line. Just wait and see. I really think that's going to be coming up soon. Okay, 3 other stories I want to really run into real quick, and we'll kind of wrap this all up. A story from Axios talks about how there's the alarm sounded right now on the rise of paywall content. Let's go through this real quick. We're starting to see a lot of companies kind of merge and get together and start creating premium content for high-end readers. Justin Smith and Ben Smith have joined together to create the likes of Puck, Airmail, The Information, Axios, Punchbowl News, and others, in targeting influential, wealthy individuals with new digital publications. Quality is being supported by paying audiences. And long-term, according to NYU's Department of Media, Culture, and Communication Chair Rodney Benson, he says that it's going to have tremendously negative civic effects. A new survey of senior media leaders globally suggests growing concern that new business models, and specifically subscriptions, may be pushing journalism towards super-serving richer and more educated audiences and leaving others behind. And that's how the business model works in a capitalistic system. The problem is that we can't have so much behind paywalls that the public can't afford to break through. This is according to Kathleen Hall Jamieson, director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center and founder of factcheck.org. So now, some of the new subscription publications differ from corporate enterprise subscriptions, which are sold usually via seat licenses for thousands of dollars per year. Outlets will typically charge individuals between $100 to $500 annually to access premium content off of via newsletters, and some may choose to expense their accounts. And many of these new efforts are also targeting high-end advertisers looking to reach a premium audience willing to pay for a subscription, further subsidizing the content that's meant for elites. So that's the part they're trying to bring up over here. There's more to that. Take a look at the article for yourself. Now let's talk about podcasting. So one thing that happens, the Studio 4 team, aka Spotify Studios, is being laid off. Story comes from The Verge. Spotify is disbanding its founding podcast studio and laying off some of the team. And The Verge was told that Studio 4, Spotify Studios, has been referenced externally. It has 10 or 15 employees producing shows like Dissect and Chapo Kingpin on Trial. The affected employees were called on Friday and said that the last days will be January 21st. They'll receive 2 months worth of severance. Some have been reassigned while others will be laid off and appointed to the Spotify job board. That's not good news. The next thing that comes up is Bloomberg decided to go and take a shot at podcasting. They put a story out saying podcasting has not produced a new hit in years. So I'm going to need a couple minutes to get to this part, because this part obviously is going to piss me off. But of course they were going to do that, weren't they? So Dawn Ostroff is Chief Content Officer of Spotify. She's upset that her company isn't producing enough to do popular podcasts, and has been putting pressure on her in-house studios to deliver. And now there's the same message being said by from every corner of the Spotify universe. It's hard to find new shows to find an audience. Every new show has a smaller audience than its predecessors. So none of the top 10 most popular podcasts in the U.S. debuted last year in the last couple of years, according to Edison Research. They're on an average more than 7 years old. Now, 3 of the top 5 are more than a decade old. That's The Joe Rogan Experience, This American Life, and Stuff You Should Know. And only a few podcasts in the top 50 are less than 2 years old. That's Smart Less, the Michelle Obama podcast, and Frenemies. And none of them in the top 25. So this vexes executives and producers across the podcasting industry who worry they are wasting a lot of money on new shows. Spotify, Amazon, SiriusXM, iHeartMedia, and outside investors have plowed billions of dollars into production companies. Spotify has spent more than anyone, paying about $500 million for 3 studios. Where is all this money going if these companies aren't producing new hits? And pretty much everyone agrees on the reason. There are more than podcasts than ever before. Spotify hosts more than 3 million podcasts, up from a few 100,000 just a few years ago. Disclaimer, all of my programming, Wrestling Gets Real Podcast, Broadcasters Podcast, and What Am I Podcasting are all available on Spotify. And I listen to them there myself. The number of new podcasts has grown quickly than the podcast audience, and some of the number of listeners per show is going down. Well, not everybody can go and be a podcaster and do a successful podcast. And some podcasters feel that they're just using the podcasting platform, the audio format, to continue to branch out their audience, which is initially a video program, which I know a number of shows have a video component. This and my other shows do not. And discovering new shows is harder than ever as a result. We rely on recommendations, algorithms, word of mouth to guide us. While you're on list the best podcast can boost the audience for a show, the platforms need to do a better job of guiding listeners. Yeah, that's true. It is hard to find new podcasts, and I tried that over the fall just to find new sports programming, and it was really tough. And it's because there's media outlets out there that feel like they need to go and do this audio content. They're not good at it. And if they do it, they just feel like this is just another area that's going to reach your audience. It's just another marketing tool. Well, they're not really putting the effort and the research and what they need to into the show and being consistent and frequent and always putting out content as much as possible. I take time regularly to make sure my programming is done and ready. And most importantly, and I bet you some of you podcasters don't do this, but you should, because some of you do it, your show is way too damn long. I keep my wrestling show at 1 hour. I keep this show at 1 hour. And I keep one of my podcasting series 5, 10, 15-minute segments at the most. And what I will do is I will listen back to them. And I'm sure there's a number of you that are a little afraid of doing that. Going back and listening to your shows to really just criticize and critique what you did. Not listen, was there a mistake with the interview? Did it sound bad? No. There's part of that. But for me, I want to be able to listen back to what I said, because I do a monologue show on all my formats. And I want to make sure when I'm doing this, I hear myself. I'm not umming and ahhing. I'm not flubbing around, which I do a little bit when I'm reading stuff on here, because, reading on the computer sometimes can be a little bit tough. But when I look at what I'm doing here, and I hear other podcasters out there and how they could really trim down the amount of time they're doing their podcasts, the other thing you got to think about as well, the audience you're going to get, some of these shows that decide to do 2, 3, 4 hours long, make them shorter. Like, you don't have to be doing radio like like doing radio. Less is more in this form. So what you're doing is, cut your shows down to something much more meaningful. I mean, I can't say how many times where some podcasts I don't even listen to the end. And I know there's people who listen to my programming that don't listen to the end. They might have heard just of the Steve Harvey cancel culture stuff and dropped off. And that's okay. But what I'm trying to do here is, you got to be able to realize if you're doing these shows, how about doing something different too? And I've said this before. Look outside the box of what you can do in terms of programming. And also, if you're going to be on here, don't just say what everybody else is saying. Have something else to say. If you have your expertise, then use it. Don't just go ahead and feel like you can go a little bit of programming and then you go, oh, let's send you to a Patreon page or some other premium service so we can get you for more information. So you can get the better information that you're going to get, more quality, more content somewhere else, as long as you pay me. As long as you tip me here, you throw me a Patreon or meet me on Substack or wherever. Or go onto my YouTube feed and subscribe. There's a lot of that going on, and that's why you don't have to do that. Fragmentation is happening across media. It's always easier to find an audience when you're early to a trend. Easier to build a big audience on YouTube 5 years ago than it was today. That's why a lot of people are flocking to TikTok. Soon enough, it will be a new platform of choice. Now, podcasters that launched 10 years ago or 5 years ago have a big advantage over ones that were brand new. They had years to build up an audience, gather word of mouth, and appear in search results. Been around 10 years. It'll be 10 years at the end of this year. I will have reached my 10-year mark here. And, of course, 17 years doing this all together coming up in August. Sure, that's a long time. People will sometimes compare podcasting to TV, and there are always these shows to try. There's truth on the narrative side, but the most popular podcasts aren't narrative shows for the most part. They're talking news, known as always-on shows. So even though podcasting presents itself as an alternative to radio, a more modern version of radio, several executives said the new industry would need to learn from radio to navigate its new reality, which I already said you always had to. You had to figure out what radio did because that's where radio listeners would be now, is podcasting. Just like you're a cable TV watcher, watching network or cable TV, you're still watching the shows. You're just eliminating the commercial format. You're getting rid of the breaks. Or you're just making the breaks a little bit more transitioned in smoothly, and you're endorsing more instead of just putting some commercial from whatever insurance company is, insert this insurance commercial here. Pretty much, it looks like that's all there is out there. And companies that rely on existing hits to launch new shows. Podcast listeners are loyal. They develop attachments to individual shows, stations, and hosts. They rather listen on their take on a subject, even if it's not good, than the savvy take of a newcomer. Faced with an onslaught of new podcasts, people are heading to retreating to the familiar. And companies use these hits to promote new shows. They'll also need to require investment in marketing, innovation of formats. There was a period of podcasting where studios figured they could just hire a celebrity to host the show and attract a large share of audience. But the novelty to celebrity-hosted podcasts has faded now that so many of them have shows. Right. It's kind of taken a Sirius XM kind of idea on how they do satellite radio. And where podcasting took that same idea here. These bigger companies, they figured, let's do the same thing. So another thing that companies need to understand, especially Spotify, is looking abroad. Spotify is already a leading podcast service in a lot of other countries, investing a ton of money in the podcasts in Latin America, Europe, and Asia. And it may have more room to grow in some of these markets, at least as a podcast, than it does in the U.S. Doesn't mean the podcast can't be hits, but the bar for being a hit is higher, which means it's going to take longer and a lot more work to get there. Lucas Shaw wrote the story. Thank you very much for that. So all I got to say about that part is just, look, there's a lot of podcasters out there that, if you're not completely committed to it, I mean, if you just feel like it's just something there and you have to pay attention to your listeners. You have to, you can't just dumb yourself down and just think, well, I could just kind of just wing a show. Take your time, actually do it. Like radio people doing a live talk show for 3 hours or 4 hours, that is work you have to do. Now, some are just rely on, let's just get call-ins and whatever. No. When you're able to go ahead and talk for 4 hours like that, and you can keep people continuously entertained. Remember, the reason that some shows would go so long is because you're catching people that are catching the show at certain times. You're catching people, if they're listening to podcasts, they're not going to just start a show and listen right to the middle. No, they're going to start at the beginning. So you got the retention right then and there. So make sure you got good stuff to start off with right off the bat, and only give them the good stuff. Do not waste people's time with just some lollygagging and just some other things. Do not be Howard Stern. You are not going to be Howard Stern. Don't try to be. Get to the meat of the matter. Get to what you're talking about. Don't waste people's time. Please. You're just not doing a show like you're talking. If you're going to do that, go do it on YouTube on a live broadcast or somewhere else. Because that's where it works better. In podcasting, not so much. Because sometimes that longer format works better if you're doing live streaming. And so why not do that? Instead of trying to put it into a podcast. Podcast should be compartmentalized. It should be compact. It should be easy to go listen to in at least one sitting. Like no more than 2 hours. And if you do, split it up. And make sure you kind of have a way to kind of split it up proper. That's okay too. Hey, when I used to do my interviews, I didn't run those 60 to 90 minute interviews straight through. No. I would do it after the fact. But I would put it so I could still have my other content in here. And now I'm able to do 60 minutes, breeze right through. And I've already gone past 60 minutes tonight because I wanted to get through this podcasting story. I wanted to make sure I got this in. A lot to say. And that's it. That's the program for tonight. Thank you for listening through. If you made it to the end of the program, thanks for subscribing. Please share, rate, and review the show. Get the word out there about the Broadcasters Podcast. If there's things you want me to talk about, I'd love to hear from you. kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com, or hit me up on my website, kingofpodcasts.com. There's a contact section right there. You can listen to, you can catch me there, or all my social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, among other places. And until next week, we'll come back for another show. Remember, the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.